Welcome to the Midnight Historian, a place where ancient tales unfold in hushed tones and history drifts gently into the silence of night. Close your eyes, let the past guide you into peace as we journey through forgotten stories softly told to bring you deep rest, reflection, and a serene night's sleep. This is not just history, it's history whispered into dreams. Before we begin, please consider subscribing and leave a like and a gentle comment. It helps these peaceful tales reach others who need rest. Now let's begin. As the pale winter sun dips below the distant, snow-laden hills, a profound quiet descends upon the medieval village. The air, crisp and biting, carries the faint, comforting scent of wood smoke curling in lazy plumes from the thatched roofs of humble cottages. A light frost, delicate as spun glass, blankets every surface, glinting like countless tiny diamonds in the fading light. The gentle gurgle of a partially frozen stream, winding its way through the heart of the settlement, offers a soothing melody that complements the stillness of the early evening. This is a world where the rhythms of life are dictated by the sun's brief journey and the moon's silent watch, a place where the approaching night is not merely a period of rest, but a profound test of endurance. For the average peasant, winter was less about the romanticized images of jousting knights, grand feasts, or merry fairs, and more about the stark daily question of survival. It was a season that arrived with the relentless predictability of a stern, unforgiving teacher, offering no second chances. This was not merely a period of discomfort, it was an annual, life or death struggle against the elements. The constant risks of frostbite, the insidious creep of hypothermia, and the ever-present threat of starvation were not abstract fears, but tangible dangers that loomed over every household. Each morning that a peasant awoke still breathing, with all their fingers and toes intact, was considered a small miracle, a quiet victory worth celebrating, perhaps with a slightly less frozen turnip for breakfast. This journey invites one to step back in time, to explore the remarkable, often overlooked, survival strategies of these everyday heroes. It is an invitation to witness the quiet strength, the profound ingenuity, and the unyielding determination that allowed them to endure the coldest, most brutal nights in history and to greet another frosty dawn. Dim the lights, perhaps turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and ease into this immersive journey, allowing the narratives of grit and resilience to gently guide one towards a peaceful slumber. The medieval peasant's home was a testament to necessity and resourcefulness. A fragile shell constructed from the most readily available materials, constantly battling the relentless assault of winter. These dwellings, typically small, one-room huts, were far from the insulated sanctuaries of modern times. They were, in essence, a continuous negotiation with the elements. The primary construction method for peasant homes was known as wattle and daub, a composite technique that has roots stretching back to the Neolithic period. First, a lattice-like framework of vertical wooden stakes, known as wattles, was created. These stakes, often made from flexible hazel or willow, were woven together with horizontal twigs and branches, much like a giant rustic basket. This intricate weaving provided the structural skeleton for the walls, creating a matrix of small timbers. Once the wattle framework was in place, it was daubed with a sticky, thick plaster-like material. This daub was a resourceful mixture, typically comprising wet soil, clay, sand, and straw, all bound together with a crucial, often surprising, ingredient: animal dung. The use of dung, particularly cow dung, was not an attempt to be crude or unhygienic in their eyes. It was a pragmatic choice. Dung was an abundant, cheap, and highly effective binder, lending a sticky consistency and reinforcing the daub, helping it to adhere firmly to the wattle and create a cohesive mass. This mixture was applied to both sides of the wattle, often in damp, workable balls, pressed firmly into and around the woven structure to form a homogeneous wall. Once dried, this earthen plaster could be surprisingly durable, capable of withstanding the harsh climate and even absorbing seismic energy from earthquakes due to its inherent flexibility. Despite this ingenuity, these wattle and daub walls were inherently thin and far from airtight. They were, as one historical account vividly describes, basically very enthusiastic wind tunnels with a roof. The cold wind found every crack, every gap, gleefully dancing its way into the single-room homes, swirling around and making sure comfort remained an elusive dream. Yet, this constant battle against the elements was not without its own peculiar benefit. It fostered an unyielding creativity and stubbornness, pushing peasants to find ways to patch, stuff, and muddle their way through the worst winters nature could unleash. The reliance on animal dung as a primary building material for wattle and daub construction reveals a fundamental aspect of medieval peasant life. A deeply integrated and self-sustaining micro-ecosystem within the household. The very animals that provided sustenance, labour, and crucial body warmth, as will be explored, later also generated the waste material that became a vital component of their shelter. This circular utilisation of resources meant that nothing was truly wasted. Every output from the animals, even their manure, was repurposed to enhance the living conditions and overall resilience of the family. This approach highlights a profound, practical understanding of their environment and the necessity of maximising every available input to ensure collective survival. The peasant household, therefore, functioned as a testament to resourcefulness, where the cycle of life and waste was meticulously woven into the fabric of their daily existence. Above the humble walls, thatched roofs provided a picturesque, yet often problematic, covering. While cheap and plentiful, made from straw, reeds, or other dried vegetation, these roofs were susceptible to the harsh realities of winter. After months of rain and snow, they would sag, leak, and occasionally even allow local wildlife to drop in uninvited, adding an element of surprise to an already challenging evening. Maintaining these roofs was an ongoing, arduous task. Peasants would constantly plug holes and reinforce weak spots with whatever spare materials they could find. Bits of cloth, bundles of reeds, or even chunks of turf stolen from a nearby field in moments of true desperation. This continuous vigilance was a quiet, unglamorous battle against the elements, ensuring that the roof, however imperfect, continued to offer some semblance of protection against the biting cold and damp. Light and access were rudimentary in these peasant homes. Windows, if they existed at all, were laughably tiny holes in the walls, usually covered with thin animal hides or simple wooden shutters. Glass was an exorbitant luxury, so expensive that even a lord of the manor might only afford a single small pane, leaving peasants content if the wind didn't rip their cowhide window covering off mid-blizzard. Doors were often little more than wooden planks hung by iron nails, or in some cases, merely a curtain, offering minimal barrier against the external cold. The consequence of such basic construction was a perpetual state of draughtiness. The homes were never truly sealed, allowing the cold wind to relentlessly penetrate every crevice. This constant influx of frigid air meant that the indoor temperature was often just a few polite degrees above whatever the weather was doing outside. If it was freezing outdoors, it was merely politely slightly less freezing inside. This pervasive cold, seeping in from all sides, made true comfort an impossibility, demanding constant adaptation and resilience from the inhabitants. Beneath the thin walls and leaky roofs, the floors of peasant homes offered little respite from the cold. They were typically just compacted dirt, a slightly flatter patch of earth inside the dwelling. This direct contact with the ground meant that the cold was a three-dimensional assault, seeping up from below with a relentless intensity, worming its way through any thin coverings and deep into the bones. Dropping anything onto the floor on a winter night often meant it became part of the permafrost. To combat this chilling reality, peasants employed layers of natural insulation. Thick mats of straw or dried rushes were spread across the floor, providing a crucial barrier against the frozen earth. These materials, either strewn loosely to form a thick carpet or woven into plated mats, offered a modicum of cushioning and warmth. For those lucky enough to have a wooden bed frame, it was usually packed with more straw or hay, offering a slightly raised, albeit still crunchy and pokey, sleeping surface. However, this living carpet came with its own set of challenges. The straw flattened quickly, grew mouldy even faster, and provided a welcoming habitat for fleas, lice, and other mystery creatures, creating a fascinating ecosystem within the home. This constant presence of dampness from the earth, combined with the organic matter of the straw and rushes, contributed to a pervasive mustiness and attracted pests. The fundamental construction of peasant homes, particularly the reliance on compacted dirt floors and the use of organic materials like straw and rushes for insulation, created a constant underlying health burden. The persistent dampness from the earth, combined with the lack of proper ventilation in these single-room dwellings, fostered an environment ripe for mold growth and exacerbated the presence of pests. This perpetually cold and damp indoor climate significantly contributed to the prevalence of respiratory illnesses such as pneumonia and bronchitis, which were often fatal in a population already weakened by malnutrition. The very foundation of their shelter, designed to offer protection, simultaneously acted as a silent adversary, contributing to chronic ailments that made winter survival an even more precarious endeavour. If the medieval home was a fragile shell, then the hearth was its beating heart, the singular, unwavering defence against the cold, the encroaching darkness, and the pervasive gloom of winter. It was the absolute centre of peasant life, serving multiple, indispensable functions. At the core of nearly every peasant home was a simple fire, often just a basic pit or a pile of stones. This was no grand fireplace with a fancy stone mantel or a neat chimney sweeping smoke skyward. Instead, it was a raw, elemental flame that served as the kitchen, where meals were cooked in suspended cauldrons. It was the only source of light after sunset, casting flickering shadows that danced across the smoky walls. Beyond its practical uses, the hearth was the social hub, the medieval equivalent of a television, where families gathered to tell stories, gossip, or simply stare into the mesmerising flames, for there was little else to do once darkness fell. Keeping this fire alive was not merely a good idea, it was a mandatory, non-negotiable duty. To allow the fire to die out at night was akin to putting up a sign for the cold to come in and claim its victims. The warmth it provided, however meagre, was the thread upon which life itself hung. The absence of chimneys in most peasant homes meant that smoke was a constant, pervasive presence. It did its best, drifting out through small holes in the roof, cracks in the walls, or, quite often, directly into the lungs of the inhabitants if it was feeling lazy that evening. This smoky atmosphere, while far from ideal for breathing or long-term health, offered a grim, unexpected benefit. It did a remarkably effective job of fumigating fleas, lice, and other unwanted guest but-ive. In a world without modern pest control, being marinated in smoke 24/7 was a crude, yet functional, method of keeping vermin at bay. However, this constant exposure to wood smoke came at a significant cost to respiratory health. The levels of smoky particles and carbon monoxide within these homes were considerably higher than those found in modern dwellings, contributing to chronic health problems over the long run, while some historical accounts even suggested that the pervasive wood smoke might have been healthier than fresh air. The evidence points to a clear link between such conditions and respiratory diseases like pneumonia, bronchitis, and other infections. This created a profound dilemma. The very element that provided warmth and pest control simultaneously acted as a slow, silent threat to the inhabitants' lungs. This inherent contradiction highlights the harsh realities and difficult trade-offs that defined medieval peasant survival. The thought of the fire dying out overnight was a profound fear, second only to running out of ale. In the dead of winter, restarting a fire from scratch was not merely inconvenient, it could be deadly. Matches did not exist, and lighters were a distant dream. Rekindling a fire meant striking flint and steel together, praying for a single precious spark, and then coddling that spark with tender love and whatever dry kindling remained. Imagine attempting this in the freezing dark, half asleep, with fingers stiff from the cold, perhaps with the distant howl of a hungry wolf adding to the urgency. To avoid this perilous undertaking, peasants developed the art of banking the fire. This involved carefully burying the glowing embers under a mound of ash just before bed 5. The ash acted as an insulating blanket, preserving the coals, keeping them alive, just barely, until morning. If done correctly, one could simply poke the pile at sunrise, add fresh wood, and voila! Fire without the frostbite. This technique was an essential skill, often passed down from parent to child like a prized family recipe. with each household having its own subtle secrets and preferences for achieving the perfect bank. The success of firebanking was a victory in itself, but the morning still required diligent effort to bring the banked embers back to a roaring flame. The process involved carefully uncovering the glowing coals, adding small, dry kindling such as dried brush, straw, birch bark, rotten wood, pine needles, or small twigs, while charcloth, a highly flammable material, became more common in later centuries. Earlier medieval peasants likely used materials like amadou, a processed fungus, to catch the precious spark from flint and steel. This delicate operation, often performed with cold, begrudging hands, was a constant battle between human persistence and the smothering cold that sought to snuff out any warmth. In a world where letting the fire die could mean death, peasants developed a communal survival strategy, sleeping in shifts. This was not a grand, organised system with whistles and roll calls, but a more desperate, practical arrangement. Half the household would remain awake, tending to the fire, stoking the flames, watching the embers and adding fuel, while the other half curled up under their threadbare blankets and hay, attempting to snatch a few precious hours of half-frozen sleep. The fire demanded constant attention. Left alone, it would dwindle and die, and restarting it was a monumental task. Thus, someone always had to be on ember patrol. Families rotated these shifts, with tired individuals dozing for a few hours before being elbowed awake to stumble to the hearth, poke and prod the fire back to life, all while trying to avoid stepping on a sleeping goat. Even children old enough to hold a stick were pressed into service, learning early that in winter everyone contributed their weight or risked freezing. Grandparents, with their accumulated experience, sometimes stayed by the fire longer, their wisdom as valuable as their warmth. This practice of sleeping in shifts was not an isolated necessity, but aligned with a broader historical pattern known as biphasic sleep, common in pre-industrial societies. In the absence of artificial lighting, human circadian rhythms naturally adapted to a segmented sleep pattern consisting of a first sleep and a second sleep, separated by a period of wakefulness known as the watch. This natural wakeful interval was perfectly suited for tasks like tending the fire, patching drafts, or performing other household chores that required attention during the long, dark winter nights. This demonstrates how human biology and daily routine were profoundly shaped by environmental conditions, allowing them to integrate essential survival tasks into their natural sleep cycle, maximizing both rest and vigilance. The hearth, the heart of the home, demanded a constant supply of fuel. Peasants relied on various materials, primarily wood, but also peat, sticks and brushwood. Oak, beech and birch were favoured woods, with birch being excellent for kindling and oak and beech providing long, even burns. Gathering this fuel was an arduous, year-round task that intensified in winter. While some wood was cut and split in summer, much of it had to be collected even in the depth of snow and frost. Women and children often bore the brunt of this labour, dragging hacked-up stumps, branches, or bundles of sticks from mountainous woods, a task of incredible toil and patience. Proper drying and storage of firewood were crucial to ensure efficient burning and to minimise the risk of fire. The sheer volume of wood required to keep a peasant home even moderately warm throughout the winter was immense, representing a colossal, ongoing labour demand. The constant and substantial need for fuel, particularly wood, imposed a significant and continuous labour burden on medieval peasants. This relentless demand contributed to widespread deforestation in many areas, as forests were cleared not only for fuel but also for arable land. The diminishing supply of wood even made basic necessities like hot water a luxury in some regions. This highlights that their survival strategies, while ingenious, were not without their own ecological and physical costs. The arduous year-round effort of gathering, processing, and storing fuel was a fundamental, often overlooked component of their daily struggle against the cold, demanding continuous, strenuous effort even in the harshest weather. When the fire sputtered and the freezing winds whistled through every crack in their humble dwellings, medieval peasants turned to their most reliable and readily available source of warmth, each other. In medieval times, the phrase "the more the merrier" was not just about parties, It was a literal winter survival tactic. Forget personal space or privacy. These concepts were barely existent. On the coldest nights, the primary objective was simply to avoid waking up frozen to the floor. Entire households, often including extended family, neighbours, and even guests, would pile into the warmest corner of the house, forming what has been aptly described as a desperate, snoring human lasagna. Younger children would be squeezed tightly between parents, while grandparents snuggled under the outer layers. If a cousin or a travelling peddler unexpectedly arrived, there was always room for one more, as shared body heat was a collective good. The most vulnerable individuals, infants, the elderly, and the sick, were given prime real estate, tucked deep in the centre of the huddle, treated as precious little heat generators. Stronger adults would fan out from there, acting as human insulation layers, shielding the core from the biting drafts. Woe to the person who moved too much during the night, risking exposing Aunt Maud to the freezing draught by the wall and instantly becoming the family villain. Bedding itself was often shared, typically a communal straw mattress that slowly flattened under the nightly weight of multiple generations. While hygiene was not a priority by modern standards, and the sleeping arrangements were far from fragrant, the immediate threat of frostbite superseded any pickiness. The necessity of communal sleeping for warmth fundamentally reshaped social dynamics, and the very concept of privacy in medieval peasant life. By modern standards, the constant close proximity of family, neighbours, and even strangers in shared beds would seem intrusive and lacking in personal space. Yet, within this seemingly undifferentiated existence, there were established social conventions such as minimizing fidgeting and physical contact with non-family bedmates. Furthermore, this shared vulnerability fostered a unique form of collective intimacy. The darkness and close quarters of the shared bed became a rare space for candid conversations, whispered secrets, and intimate moments between couples, away from the prying eyes of the day. This redefinition of privacy illustrates how the extreme conditions of winter forced a profound adaptation in social behaviour, where shared discomfort forged deeper bonds and a collective identity, making interdependence not just a strategy, but a way of life. If human body heat was crucial, then the warmth generated by livestock was a vital supplement. Bringing animals indoors was not merely a quirky village tradition, it was a critical survival tactic. Cows, goats, pigs, and chickens, anything with a pulse and a bit of body heat, were welcomed into the one-room huts. In poorly insulated dwellings where the wind howled louder than a hungry stomach, every single degree of warmth mattered. Beyond the warmth, housing animals indoors also offered a practical benefit. It made them slightly less likely to be stolen by a desperate neighbour in the dead of night. At night, the peasant home transformed into a chaotic living furnace. Chickens nested in corners or rafters, pigs snorted near the hearth, and cows luxuriously lounged against the walls, chewing cud as if they paid rent. It was far from glamorous. The smells, by springtime, were legendary, a potent perfume of shared winter that could make one's nostrils embark on a wild ride. Yet, peasants developed a selective nose, rarely complaining, for they understood a simple, uncomfortable truth. The more animals inside, the fewer frozen toes in the morning. Certain animals even had prime spots. Cows, being the largest and warmest, usually took centre stage near the family, while goats, with their innate ability to find a way inside anyway, were allowed closer in for their warmth. Of course, sharing a bedroom with livestock was not without its hazards. Imagine drifting off peacefully only to be rudely awakened by a chicken deciding one's hair made a good perch, or stepping barefoot into something suspicious first thing in the morning. Despite the noise, the smells, and the occasional hoof to the ribs, peasants understood the simple math: cold kills and cows cuddle, whether they want to or not. The integration of livestock into peasant homes was a fundamental survival strategy, transforming animals from mere property into active, living heat sources. This created a unique, intimate, and often messy symbiosis between humans and their animals. The decision to share living quarters with livestock was driven by the pragmatic understanding that the collective body heat of animals could significantly raise the internal temperature of a poorly insulated dwelling, directly contributing to human survival. 5. This profound interdependence highlights how medieval peasants viewed their animals not just as resources for food or labour, but as essential household members whose very presence was critical for enduring the winter, demonstrating a deep reliance on the natural world for their existence. To truly understand medieval peasant survival, one must immerse oneself in the sensory landscape of their winter home, a world far removed from modern comforts, yet rich with the raw textures of life. The sounds of a medieval winter night were a constant symphony of survival. Outside, the wind howled like an angry ghost, a relentless, mournful cry battering against the thin walls and rattling the makeshift window coverings. Inside, the fire in the hearth sputtered and crackled, its pops and hisses a fragile promise of warmth, punctuated by the rustling and snorting of livestock, the soft clucking of chickens, and the occasional human snore. Every toss and turn on a straw mattress brought a delightful soundtrack of crinkling straw and the occasional sharp jab from a rogue stork. The overall auditory environment was one of constant, subtle struggle against the cold and the elements, a lullaby of endurance. The smells were arguably the most potent and pervasive sensory experience. The dominant aroma was undoubtedly wood smoke, thick and acrid, clinging to everything and everyone due to the lack of chimneys. This mingled with the strong, earthy scent of animal dung, both from the walls themselves and from the livestock sharing the living space. The pervasive odour of unwashed bodies and rough-spun wool, combined with the mustiness of decomposing straw bedding, created a powerful, unique perfume of shared winter. While some attempts were made to mask these odours with strewing herbs like lavender or rosemary, the underlying reality was a constant assault on the nostrils. Peasants, however, developed a selective nose, accepting these powerful aromas as an intrinsic part of their survival. The textures encountered were rough and unyielding. Clothing consisted of scratchy linen undertunics and rough-spun wool outer layers, often smelling suspiciously of goat. Beds were sacks stuffed with poking, shifting straw or hay, offering little softness. The floors were cold, hard dirt, often damp, making every step feel like trudging across a frozen marsh. The constant feeling was one of being encased in coarse, utilitarian materials, a stark contrast to modern notions of comfort. Visuals were dominated by the pervasive darkness, which swallowed everything beyond the immediate, flickering glow of the hearth fire. Inside, breath fogged visibly in the frigid air, even near the fire's fragile circle. Outside, a light frost blanketed the thatched roofs, glinting briefly in the pale morning light, a stark reminder of the cold's grip. The walls, made of sticks and mud, would appear as slightly sad patchwork quilts, testament to constant, desperate repairs. This immersive sensory landscape within the medieval peasant home in winter was not merely a collection of unpleasant details. It was an intrinsic part of their survival. The constant presence of pervasive smells, the cacophony of natural and animal sounds, and the unyielding textures of their environment demanded a profound sensory adaptation. Peasants developed a selective nose and a tolerance for conditions that would be unbearable today, effectively redefining comfort through the lens of survival. This continuous sensory immersion reinforced their deep connection to the natural world and their animals, shaping their daily existence and expectations. It demonstrates that their resilience was not just physical, but also a deep psychological and sensory adjustment to a world where raw, elemental realities were inescapable. In medieval winters, fashion was a luxury few could afford. The primary purpose of clothing was simply not to die. Peasants weren't concerned with the latest trends. They were layering up as if preparing for a continuous battle against the Grim Reaper himself. The fundamental rule of medieval peasant attire was simple. If one owned it, one wore it, sometimes all at once. The base layer was typically a scratchy, often not too clean, linen undertunic, chosen for its ability to absorb moisture and provide a barrier against the coarser outer layers. Over this, thicker woolen tunics were piled on, sometimes one, then another if available. Wool was the most common and versatile fabric, prized for its warming and water-repellent properties. Depending on how it was processed, wool could be thick and warm or lighter, but its natural fibres had elasticity and could absorb moisture without feeling wet, making it ideal for damp, cold conditions. Leggings, often sagging at the knees, and a rough cloak, perhaps smelling suspiciously of goat, completed the ensemble. If a peasant was truly fortunate, a patched-up sheepskin might be thrown on top like a prized trophy. This multi-layered approach was remarkably effective. The various layers trapped air between them, creating insulating pockets that helped to retain precious body heat. While the result might have been a somewhat lumpy, itchy human onion, it was a practical strategy that offered crucial protection against the biting cold. Perhaps one of the most unconventional yet effective survival strategies employed by medieval peasants involved their clothing, the strategic accumulation of grime. In the medieval peasant playbook, dirt was not merely something to be scrubbed off. It was practically a survival tool, a tactical and even ingenious element of their winter wardrobe. As peasants trudged through day after day without the luxury of frequent washing, layers of grime, natural body oils, and good old-fashioned mud began to build up on their tunics, cloaks, and leggings. Over time, this natural armour clogged the tiny gaps in the fabric, making the clothes more wind-resistant and effectively trapping body heat. It functioned like a medieval Gore-Tex jacket, albeit a smellier and far less socially acceptable one by modern standards. The belief that washing oneself too often in winter could actually make one sick further reinforced this practice, leading peasants to maintain this protective holy filth barrier intact. Bathing was rare, laundry even rarer, and soap was a luxury reserved for serious occasions. This unconventional practice of allowing grime to accumulate on clothing was a pragmatic adaptation to the harsh realities of medieval winter. It demonstrates a profound departure from modern hygiene standards, driven by the immediate and critical need for warmth and protection rather than aesthetic or contemporary health concerns. The holy filth barrier was not a sign of slovenliness, but a deliberate, if unscientific, method of enhancing insulation and wind resistance. This highlights how medieval peasants prioritized functional survival over cleanliness, showcasing a resourcefulness that transformed an apparent deficiency into a vital component of their cold weather resilience. In a world where everyone likely stank to high heaven, personal odour was less of an offence, and nose blindness was practically a way of life. Protecting the extremities was paramount to preventing frostbite and hypothermia. Boots were often a luxury. So many peasants resorted to wrapping their feet in multiple layers of cloth or old rags, stuffing them into wooden clogs or pattens. Overshoes with raised wooden or metal soles designed to elevate the foot above the mud and cold of the street. If the cold still bit through, another rag was added, and prayers were offered that no toes would be lost. Hats, scarves, and gloves were considered prized treasures. A simple woolen cap could mean the difference between making it through the night and waking up with hair frozen to the wall. Gloves were often homemade from scraps of leather or fabric, sometimes resembling sad puppet costumes more than fashionable accessories. Children were especially swaddled, resembling overstuffed turnips waddling awkwardly around the house, their layers designed to trap as much precious body heat as possible. Beyond the visible layers of clothing, medieval peasants even adapted their very breathing patterns to survive the coldest nights. The problem was simple. Deep, open-mouthed breathing pulled icy air straight into the lungs, a significant risk in a world where pneumonia could kill faster than one could utter a prayer. To counter this, peasants learned the art of what might be called survival breathing. Instead of sucking in huge gulps of air, they kept their breathing shallow, slow, and, most importantly, through the nose. The aim was to gently warm the incoming air slightly before it reached their lungs, reducing the shock and potential for respiratory illness. If one accidentally took a big mouthful of cold air, it could mean a week of hacking up what felt like one's soul, with no doctors in sight and only hot onion tea and firm prayers from grandma as remedies. Some individuals even tucked parts of their cloaks, shawls, or rags up over their faces while they slept, creating a makeshift breath warmer barrier. While this resulted in a damp, slightly soggy fabric patch clinging to the mouth by morning, it was considered a small price to pay to avoid freezing from the inside out. Children were taught these tricks early, scolded for panting like dogs indoors during the cold months. This subtle, almost instinctive physiological adaptation highlights the extreme lengths to which their bodies and minds adapted to the relentless cold. It demonstrates that survival was not just about grand strategies like fire or shelter, but also about continuous adjustments to bodily functions in the face of constant peril. Beyond physical shelter and clothing, medieval peasants relied on strategic dietary choices and clever, low-tech inventions to generate and conserve warmth. In the endless battle against medieval winter, peasants discovered an unlikely secret weapon: a full stomach. It became clear that one of the best ways to fight off the cold was not merely another scratchy wool cloak, but to fill oneself with something hearty and heavy right before bed. This was basic medieval thermodynamics. Calories meant warmth. The more the body had to digest, the more internal heat it generated through the metabolic process. The goal was simple: eat a heavy meal, generate internal heat, and perhaps, just perhaps, survive until morning without turning into a peasant-shaped popsicle. The typical pre-sleep meal consisted of thick stews, rich with root vegetables like turnips, onions, parsnips, and cabbages. Grains were lifesavers, forming the backbone of their diet, appearing as oat porridge, barley gruel, or dense, chewy rye bread. If a family was especially lucky, perhaps after a festival day or a generous slaughter, a hunk of salted pork or a slice of dried sausage might be added to the pot. This was not comfort food in the modern sense. It was one enormous, often vaguely brown, meal designed to sit in the gut like a friendly brick, slowly burning through the night and providing a steady trickle of warmth. Fatty foods were particularly prized, not just for their energy, but because fat burns slower than lean meat, offering sustained heat. Parents ensured even the pickiest children ate heartily, understanding that a full belly was a crucial defense against the night's chill. For medieval peasants, food was not merely sustenance but a critical thermogenic tool. The strategy of consuming large, calorie-dense, and particularly fatty meals before sleep was a deliberate, albeit unscientific, application of thermodynamics for survival. This approach recognized that the body's digestive processes generated internal heat, which could then be leveraged to combat the external cold throughout the long, dark hours of the night. This demonstrates a practical understanding of how to use available resources to actively regulate body temperature, transforming a basic need into a sophisticated survival mechanism. Autumn was a crucial period for medieval peasants, a time of intense labour dedicated to preparing and preserving the harvest for the lean, cold months ahead. Without modern refrigeration, they relied on ingenious methods to ensure a steady food supply through winter. Drying was a common and effective technique used for grains like rye and wheat, as well as fruits and meats. Grains were sun-dried or air-dried before storage, while fruits were sun-dried in warmer climates or oven-dried in cooler regions. Meat and fish were also dried, sometimes after being gutted, to remove moisture and prevent microbial growth. Salting was perhaps the most widespread method for preserving meat and fish, drawing out moisture and inhibiting bacteria. Pieces of meat were pressed with dry salt and layered in containers, or soaked in large brine baths. Vegetables could also be preserved with dry salt or through pickling, which involved soaking them in salt brine with herbs and spices or in vinegar. The downside was an overwhelmingly salty flavour, often masked by spices or by rinsing the food multiple times before consumption. Smoking was another vital technique, particularly for pork and fish, as the smoke helped to preserve the food while imparting flavour. Honey, an excellent natural preservative, was used to store fruits and even meats, sealing them against spoilage. These diverse preservation methods, though labour-intensive, were critical for ensuring that the village had enough to eat until the next spring harvest. Ale played a significant role in the medieval peasant diet, serving as a source of both calories and hydration. Children, as well as adults, commonly drank ale, as it was believed to be safer than water. However, the notion that medieval people drank ale constantly because water was universally unsafe is a common misconception. While the brewing process, which involved heating, did kill microbes, water sources outside of crowded cities were often not as bad as commonly imagined, and people certainly drank water as their primary mode of hydration. The ale consumed daily, often referred to as small beer, was typically very weak, sometimes less than 1% alcohol content, brewed from the dregs of stronger batches. This low alcohol content meant that it was consumed for its flavour and caloric value rather than for intoxication, providing necessary energy for their strenuous daily lives. Brewing was primarily a domestic occupation, often carried out by women who would brew for their families and sometimes sell any surplus to neighbours. Long before electric blankets or heated mattress pads, medieval peasants devised clever, low-tech solutions for localised warmth. The humble haybox and the heated stone were unsung heroes of winter nights. The haybox, though rustic, was a stroke of genius. It typically consisted of a sturdy wooden box thickly lined with hay. Cooked food, such as a hot stew or porridge, would be placed inside and then covered with more hay to insulate it. This ingenious setup allowed food to continue cooking in its residual heat for hours, or simply kept it warm for a late-night snack without needing to rekindle the main fire. It was, in essence, a medieval slow cooker or an insulated flask, maximising the efficiency of their precious fuel. Building on this principle, peasants also utilised heated stones for personal warmth. Before heading to bed, a flat stone would be placed directly into the heart of the hearth fire and roasted until it was nearly too hot to touch. A fine line between helpful warmth and a third-degree burn. Once sufficiently heated, the stone would be carefully retrieved, often using a stick or old tongs, and then wrapped in rags, tucked into an old piece of cloth, or even placed in a clay pot. This radiating blissful warmth would then be slipped under the hay in the mattress or down at the foot of the bed, acting as a medieval heating pad to combat the cold seeping up from the earth. Of course, these methods carried risks. An improperly wrapped stone could lead to a localised house fire, and dropping one on a foot could result in a painful winter injury. Yet when everything went right, that heated stone provided precious, comforting warmth that could last for hours. In a half-frozen hut, luxury was defined as not waking up with icicles dangling from one's nose. The development and widespread use of hayboxes and heated stones demonstrate remarkable ingenuity in localised heat management. These simple, accessible technologies, born from necessity, reveal a deep, practical understanding of insulation and heat transfer. By leveraging readily available materials like hay and stones, peasants found ways to extend the warmth of their hearths beyond the immediate fire, providing targeted heat for food preservation and personal comfort during the long, frigid nights. This highlights their practical problem-solving skills and their ability to innovate within a resource-scarce environment, turning everyday objects into vital survival aids. In the medieval world, no one survived winter alone. The brutal cold transformed individual struggles into a collective endeavour, making survival not just a family affair, but a village-wide project. Peasants understood that in the dead of winter, a strong fire and a pile of hay could only do so much. True resilience lay in their collective strength. If a neighbour's house went dark, or if the smoke from old Tom's hearth suddenly stopped curling into the sky, someone would go to check. This wasn't merely out of curiosity, or even just because Tom might owe a chicken, it was because community meant survival. Villages often had unofficial winter watchers, typically the young or the elderly who couldn't work the fields, but who could keep an eye on who was coughing too hard, who hadn't come to barter at the market in a few days, or whose home looked a little too still in the morning frost. If a family's fire went out, it was considered a near emergency. A good neighbour would rush over with a glowing coal bundled in rags, or, even better, invite the freezing family into their own smoky, already overcrowded hut for the night. While it meant squeezing an extra 4 bodies into an already cramped space, it was infinitely preferable to finding frozen friends come spring thaw. Communal food stores also played a vital role. During particularly brutal winters, villagers sometimes pooled their last salted meat, grain, and dried vegetables, sharing what little they had. These communal meals, though grim, could be the difference between staggering into spring or perishing. Even children understood the stakes, helping to deliver wood, share embers, and run urgent messages when someone needed help. No one was too small, or too tired when winter came knocking. While medieval villages were not always idyllic, with feuds and disputes over land or livestock occasionally flaring up, these old grudges were often quietly shelved when the nights grew deadly cold. The immediate existential threat of winter forced a pragmatic cooperation, demonstrating that a rival was still worth saving, for tomorrow it might be one's own family needing rescue. In the icy heart of winter, the village became one large, stubborn family, fiercely determined to survive together, one muddy boot, one crackling ember, one frozen smile at a time. The pervasive theme of community and mutual aid in medieval peasant life was not simply a pleasant social aspect, but a fundamental survival strategy. The village functioned as a single interdependent organism, where the well-being of one household was inextricably linked to the well-being of all. The observation that personal feuds and grudges were often set aside in the face of shared existential threat underscores how the severity of winter compelled cooperation over conflict. This highlights a deep, pragmatic social cohesion, where collective vigilance, shared resources, and reciprocal support transformed individual struggles into a unified effort, demonstrating that human interdependence was the most powerful defense against the unyielding cold. While the agricultural cycle dictated much of peasant life, winter brought a significant shift in daily routines. The cold, snow, frozen earth, and short daylight hours meant that heavy outdoor farm work largely ceased, allowing peasants to stay safe indoors. This period became an ideal time to reorganize and maintain tools, but also for a host of indoor activities. Winter was prime time for textile production and other crafts. Women and girls would spend countless hours in the dim, smoky rooms, processing flax into linen, spinning thread, weaving, knitting, embroidering, darning, and retailoring old clothes. These were not solitary tasks. Spinning gatherings were common, where young women would come together, singing, gossiping, and telling stories to keep themselves entertained while working on their dowries. These gatherings also served to conserve scarce lighting and heating resources, as multiple households could share a single fire and rushlight. Men, too, engaged in indoor crafts, repairing tools, making new ones, whittling, and basket weaving. Limited outdoor work still occurred, primarily hunting, logging, and gathering firewood, which were essential for survival and often easier to accomplish over snow-covered ground. The wakeful interval of biphasic sleep, the watch, was also utilised for various chores that could be done by moonlight or rushlight, such as tending the fire, checking on farm animals, or performing household tasks. In a world where survival was a daily gamble, faith was not merely a Sunday affair, it was woven into every frozen breath and every desperate act of endurance. When the wind howled like wolves outside their paper-thin walls and the fire shrank into sullen embers, peasants sought every possible advantage, including a little divine intervention. Before crawling under layers of straw and scratchy wool, families would kneel together, offering up hurried prayers to keep the fire burning, the roof intact, and their toes attached by morning. Saints became more than distant holy figures. They were winter's frontline defence. Saint Blaise, for instance, was called upon to protect against throat ailments, a critical concern when a single mouthful of icy air could lead to a fatal cough. Saint Nicholas, in his early form, was asked to protect households from sudden ruin during the lean, deadly months. Superstitions intertwined snugly with daily survival. Some families sprinkled holy water near the hearth before sleeping, hoping it would protect against evil spirits or, at the very least, mischievous draughts. Others marked doorways with blessed chalk after certain feast days, pleading for warmth and luck to find its way inside. Special vigil candles, often blessed by the local priest or the most pious old woman in the village, were sometimes kept burning throughout the night, a flickering plea against the cold darkness clawing at the walls. And, of course, no serious winter prayer session was complete without a few desperate promises. "Dear Lord, if you just get us through this night, I swear I'll be kinder to my neighbour, even the one who keeps stealing our turnips." Faith was not an abstract comfort, but a daily, urgent conversation, a raw hope whispered into the smoky rafters, tangled in breathless prayers, and tucked under itchy blankets, somehow carrying them through the endless, merciless nights. Beyond the physical and spiritual defences, medieval peasants possessed a profound psychological resilience, nurtured through shared human connection. The long winter nights, spent huddled together in close quarters, naturally fostered storytelling, singing and gossiping. These communal activities provided essential emotional warmth and a vital escape from the grim realities of their existence. Stories, passed down through generations, connected them to their past and offered lessons in endurance. Songs filled the quiet, cold air, lifting spirits and creating a sense of shared identity and belonging. Even simple gossip served to strengthen social bonds and alleviate the monotony of the long, dark hours. Humour, too, was a crucial coping mechanism. Amidst the chattering teeth and the constant struggle, peasants found ways to laugh, sometimes bitterly, about their predicaments. This ability to find levity in hardship, to joke about their mud and goat hair protection, was a testament to their indomitable spirit, a way to endure when despair threatened to overwhelm them. This collective engagement in narrative, music, and shared laughter transformed mere physical survival into a richer human experience, reinforcing hope and collective identity in the face of overwhelming odds. It highlights that psychological well-being, fostered through social interaction and cultural expression, was as critical to their survival as physical warmth. Despite all the ingenuity, prayers, and stubbornness medieval peasants threw at winter, the truth remained chilling. Sometimes it simply was not enough. Winter was a period of heightened vulnerability to illness. Starvation, or even chronic malnutrition, weakened bodies, leaving them highly susceptible to disease. The cramped, smoky, and often damp homes, shared with both family and livestock, became breeding grounds for a host of deadly infections. Pneumonia, bronchitis, and other respiratory ailments were particularly prevalent due to constant exposure to cold, damp air and the chronic inhalation of wood smoke. Poor hygiene practices, necessitated by the cold and lack of resources, further exacerbated health issues. Washing clothes in frozen streams was impractical, leading to layers of grime and the pervasive presence of fleas, lice, and other parasites. These infestations, combined with unsanitary living conditions, contributed to the spread of diseases. A simple cough in December could easily lead to a funeral by January, highlighting the precariousness of life and the rapid progression of illness in the absence of medical care. The interplay of cold, malnutrition, and disease formed a vicious cycle that profoundly impacted medieval peasant survival. The relentless cold weakened the body's defences and directly contributed to respiratory problems. Malnutrition, often chronic, further compromised the immune system, making individuals more susceptible to infections. Simultaneously, the very conditions necessary for warmth, cramped, smoky homes with poor ventilation, created ideal breeding grounds for pathogens and exacerbated the spread of disease, especially when combined with the pervasive lack of hygiene and pest infestations. This deadly feedback loop meant that each factor intensified the others, making winter a period of extreme vulnerability, where the struggle for warmth often directly led to the struggle against illness, demonstrating the complex and often inescapable health challenges they faced. Frostbite and hypothermia were constant, insidious threats. The cold was not just uncomfortable, it was dangerous, capable of silently claiming parts of the body. Fingers, toes, and even ears could blacken and die while still attached, leading to the grim reality of lost limbs. Some villagers survived winters only to bear the permanent badge of honour of missing digits, a stark testament to winter's toll. Hypothermia, the dangerous drop in core body temperature, brought with it a range of symptoms, including mental confusion, impaired judgment, and a sluggishness of the brain. Individuals might become disoriented, even discarding their clothing in a phenomenon known as paradoxical undressing, which tragically increased their rate of heat loss. In the final stages, a self-protective behaviour called terminal burrowing might occur, where affected individuals would seek small, enclosed spaces, as if trying to hide from the cold. These physiological responses highlight the extreme and often disorienting impact of severe cold on the human body, making simple survival a profound mental and physical battle. While peasants displayed remarkable resilience, there were times when winter simply won. Some winters were particularly cruel, such as the infamous Great Famine winter of 1315, when relentless rains destroyed crops, livestock starved, and freezing temperatures transformed an already brutal existence into a slow, grinding disaster 5. In such desperate times, stories whispered of extreme measures, eating shoe leather, tree bark, and, in the most horrifying cases, cannibalism. Houses themselves, already fragile, could collapse under the immense weight of heavy snow or battering ice storms. A roof giving way in the middle of a frozen night was not just catastrophic, it was often fatal, burying families under their own collapsing shelters. Dragging oneself through thigh-deep snow to beg shelter from neighbours offered no guarantee, especially if those neighbours were already stretched to the breaking point, clinging to their own fragile existence. Perhaps what is most haunting about medieval winter survival is the eerie normalcy of death. People accepted that each winter, some among them would not see the spring thaw. Death was not unexpected. It was simply another neighbour at the door, wrapped in frost, waiting its turn. Every morning that one woke up still breathing was, indeed, considered a minor miracle. Young children and the elderly were particularly vulnerable. Infants and younger children faced staggering mortality rates, often perishing from complications of birth, illness, or accidental deaths around the household. The elderly, whose bodies were seen as diminishing in natural heat and moisture, were highly susceptible to the cold and its associated ailments. In times of extreme famine, some elders even voluntarily starved themselves to allow younger family members a greater chance at survival. The tragic discovery of whole households in spring, bodies still locked in one another's frozen embrace, as if trying to share just a little more heat until the very end, was a poignant testament to the cold's ultimate victory. The pervasive threat of death from cold, hunger, and disease in medieval winters fostered a profound stoicism and fatalism among peasants. This constant exposure to mortality transformed their psychological landscape, leading to an acceptance of death as an eerie normalcy. This was not a surrender to despair, but a deep psychological adaptation to an environment where survival was never guaranteed. Each new dawn, therefore, was not merely the start of another day, but a quiet victory, a testament to enduring hope, and a reaffirmation of their unyielding determination against overwhelming odds. When one looks back at medieval peasants, those muddy, frost-bitten survivors of endless winters, it is tempting to see only their hardships, the cracked hands, the frozen toes, the smoke-choked huts. Yet, buried beneath all that struggle is something far more powerful, a legacy of raw, stubborn ingenuity and unbreakable endurance. They did not possess central heating, thermal jackets, or cozy memory foam mattresses. They did not even have the luxury of assuming they would survive until spring. But what they did have, and what they left behind, was the blueprint for resilience. Every hay-stuffed mattress, every carefully banked fire, every moss-crammed wall gap was a testament to human creativity under immense pressure. Faced with seemingly impossible odds, they did not collapse in despair. They adapted. They learned from the land, from each other, and from the bitter lessons carved by each brutal winter. Their communities were built on more than shared land. They were forged in shared survival. They taught each other to watch over the sick, to pool resources when food ran low, and to trust that helping a freezing neighbour today meant someone might help them tomorrow. They lived by the profound understanding that no one beats winter alone. Their faith, too, was a form of endurance, weaving prayers into their daily lives not just out of fear, but out of a fragile, stubborn hope that tomorrow might be a little warmer, a little brighter, and that after 100 dark nights, spring would indeed come again, and life would find a way to push through the frozen ground. And somehow, it did. Because of their sacrifices, because of their unglamorous victories, surviving one more night, one more storm, future generations thrived. Bit by frozen bit, they pushed humanity forward, enduring winters their ancestors could barely survive, until warmth and comfort became common expectations instead of distant dreams. Their blood, sweat, and ingenuity are stitched invisibly into the lives lived today. Every cozy blanket, every warm house, every lazy winter evening spent sipping tea under soft lights. All of it is the distant echo of countless medieval peasants refusing to yield to the cold. So, as the wind whispers outside a modern double-paned window, one might spare a thought for them, the nameless, fearless ones who turn shivering survival into a living legacy, one ember, one breath, one stubborn heartbeat at a time. Thank you for spending this quiet moment with the Midnight Historian. If tonight's story helped you find calm, please consider subscribing to join us again under the stars. Leave a like or a gentle comment. It helps these peaceful tales reach others who need rest. Until next time, sleep well, dream deep, and let the echoes of the past lull you into peace.